historical facts and real events. So in other words, telling a political story, or how I try to tell a political story. Well, to start with, I think it is extremely difficult, because the political material and the actual events that you would like to depict will exist to be written. But I would like to mention three main challenges that I had to face. So, as the first thing, all kinds of documentary data is objective, so it is not personal. This is, I think, the main obstacle and also the main challenge to deal with. Objective material is the same for everyone. It is already there. So it may be interesting, but not poetical in itself. It is pure information. So to make it art, the author has to convey his own or her own take of that material. So his own perspective has to be put into that narrative and mixed it somehow in order to make all that objective information a subjective text. So this is the first problem to overcome, to make the material subjective. And I think this is also a challenge for all kinds of political art. So the second challenge I would like to mention is the necessity to give space to the reader for interpretation. So otherwise, I think it is boring propaganda, which interestingly not a sustainable way of changing people's minds. Because I think, yes, it motivates emotionally, but only for a short time, and does not make the readers really think about the material, the documentary data or the political events that we are talking about. If a political text only includes predictable political propaganda, if it only gives the reader some answers instead of questions, it will not be very helpful to change the world. Maybe it's not the objective at all, but still, it is not very useful, because it is a very domineering way to dominate your reader, and you cannot free anyone's mind by being didactical. Your documentary material or your political perspective may urge you to speak out the harsh truth as loud as possible, but I personally try not to throw my own truth to the heads of readers. I try always to give them some space and some questions to think about, to let them to find their own answers. So this was the second challenge I had to face when writing documentary poetry, or let's say also political poetry. Well, the third thing that has to be considered, or even you can call it a trap, is to stick with the classical and trite ways of narration, forgetting to look for fresh ways while trying to be simple and communicative, which is a great thing, of course, but without a search for a proper form for the content, it probably will not fulfill its potential. So it is not writing something new for the sake of it, but due to the respect of the unique material you write about. So I always try to not overcomplicate things, but I left myself free to be playfully irrational. So those challenges I did, and well, I assume that you read or at least have an idea on my 2 projects or 2 pamphlets let's say, a series of poems regarding to the topic of this discussion, which is docupoetry or documentary poetry. So in two different projects, I tried two different methods. So the first one I'd like to talk about is the Surdi poems. In Surdi poems, my material was the urban poverty in the historical city center of Istanbul. So for a long while I visited this neighborhood, which is called Surdibi. Simply means the place inside city walls. I visited this neighborhood again and again with a photographer friend of mine. So I actually followed his lead because the photographers are, obviously very good in, in working with documentary materials. So we talked to the people, we walked around and tried to be as natural as possible. And it took like a few months. We visited the neighborhood like every weekend. And he took many pictures, many photos, and I took my notes and ended up with 6 poems in the end. So these poems I did not use the observer.
I think it makes something on it because are we still able to see ourselves? Yeah, we're still able to see ourselves.
So it's
I think it's hidden.
it's internet connectivity.
Yeah.
Okay.
There you go.
see us?
Yeah. So we cut out
Oh,
about
wait,
30 seconds
sound.
ago.
So you still hear me, right?
Yeah.
Great,
Now
yeah.
we can.
Yeah.
Well, in these poems, I prefer to be a vulnerable narrator, an alienated intellectual, also challenging my own distance to the poor people in working class that I want to talk about. I wanted to become I wanted it to become a self-conscious text. Actually, it is really weird to talk about tragedies, wars, or political fights from a position of someone who seems to know everything in the name of everyone. So who am I to tell people what they must do, right? So it must not be a moral lesson, and I tried my alienation to be absorbed by the narrative. So that was the main idea in story poems. And if my June poems, the other series of poems that I would like to say a few words. In my June poems, I dealt with real life stories and historical material. So this pamphlet or this series of poems is about the demonstrations on June 15 and June 16, 1970 in Turkey. So these demonstrations can be considered the first huge wave of demonstrations by the working class, and it actually changed the political balance in the country once and for all. So after a real shake-up in a few days, it ended with a military coup. But in an indirect way, it also paved the way to the rise of the left in 1970s. It is also a nice coincidence that the second huge wave of demonstrations in Turkey also happened in June in 2013 this time. Maybe you might remember the protests in Istanbul in Gezi Park 5 years ago. So before I wrote those poems, I made a proper research like historian, and all the poems I write are based on real events. So here I use a very different method. The method I use is to exclude my personal perspective, but to tell real stories in a formally transformed way. I took the material, the historical material, the documentary data, but transformed the narrative by assigning a formal main idea to this material in order to give a clue of my own perspective in an indirect way. It is still subjective, but in a very indirect way. So all the June poems, or each of them, have a very different and actually for once only form, if I may put it this way. So I decided to the main idea of each text, or the main formal element of each text, according to the source material. So it has arisen from written. It is a bit of a contextualist attitude, and I personally call this as a total metaphor, a transformative act spread onto the each corner of the text. So in each case, in each poem, I try to dig down into the story and try to find what is really worth asking and thinking there. So through this unique form, I always try to deconstruct my source material. So this is how, well, I can summarize the other methods I use in my June poems. And maybe before I give a pause and to make this a real discussion, I can give some examples how I, in practice, use this method I was talking about. So, for example, I can talk about this poem in June poems, Mehmet and Osman from Cevizli Cigarette Factory. So let me read a few lines in Turkish and also in English to remind you. So here comes the first couple of stanzas in Turkish. Mehmet'in telaşlı bir Mehmet'i daha var. Baba olduğunda da böyle. Mehmet'in mahcup bir Mehmet'i daha. Evlendiğinde de aynı. Kendine bir de şüpheci Mehmet edindiydi. Mecburiyetten. Keyfi yerindeydi Mehmetlerin. Hemen dibinde Osman'ın hiç tanımadığı Osmanlıları. So it goes on. And if you, well, I cannot really see if you have the text in front of you, but if you read the first line, yeah, for example, Mehmet grew another hectic Mehmet when he became a father. Mehmet already owned another Shah Mehmet when he got married. He also contracted a skeptical Mehmet, urged by necessity. So this is actually a story based on reality. It's a story about two workers. One is a naive worker who has been shot to death during a demonstration, and the other is a secret police walking next to him. And so here I try to take on the different personalities we carry in ourselves. And these expressions like the Mehmet of that Mehmet, or I don't know, the poet Efe of Efe, and those expressions, with those expressions, I try to understand the different layers in ourselves. So using this expression as a leitmotif throughout the poem was the main idea, or what I called as a total metaphor, for example. So thanks to this leitmotif, I tried to transform this real event, like story, into a poem. And so let this be an example, and I can obviously give more and more examples, and I'll give all my secrets. But Andrea, maybe I should give a pause and we can like discuss further. What do you think?
You guys have a question? Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Hold on a second. I wanted to ask you about what is the name of the poem in the June section where the spelling is deliberately messed up. What is the name of it? Is it this one you're talking about? Yeah,
A Nightmare.
A Nightmare of
Yes.
17. Can you maybe talk about that one for a moment?
Okay, yeah, sure. So, this is, well, this poem is here to depict the aftermath of the demonstration. So, as I mentioned, these demonstrations ended up with a first martial rule, then it transformed into a military coup. So it was in a way a nightmare and a very oppressive period of time. And so I wanted to express the shock of failure, and the unreadable text here is the obviously symbol for operation after the military coup. So there is a text, but you have to but the spaces are on the wrong places, as you can obviously see. So I deliberately made it unreadable. So that is, in a way, a reaction to the oppression, and it's also the expression of the shock of the workers who had like high hopes in the beginning. So yeah, this putting the spaces in the wrong places and making it unreadable is the main metaphor of the whole poem. And when you read it, it well in itself includes other metaphors, of course, but it mainly depicts the emotions.
Do you remember how you were inspired by the idea of making the text non-readable?
Well, the idea is in each poem I tried to find a unique form. So this mixing the spaces is I did it here, but never again. Only in this poem I used this method, so to speak, because it only puts to this oppressive reality that you are not allowed to speak out, and no one can hear you or listen to you. And this oppressive world, I thought, is only can only be depicted by a also not readable text.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how the idea is arising.
I love that poem.
Thank
You
you.
guys have questions for me?
So, in the beginning of the call, you mentioned the 3 challenges, and I was just wondering if you could reiterate the third one. I got don't overcomplicate, but I think there was a bad connection for a moment, so I just wanted to make sure I didn't miss anything.
Well, it is about not to, I mean, for me, it is about not to sticking to the classical ways of narration. By this, I obviously mean that the old realist or let's say socialist realist ways of writing, like a very narrative, never searching for a new form, and of course, it is good to be simple. I like it. I like simple poems. And it is good to be communicative, obviously, yes. But I think every good poem is also a result of a search for a fresh form. So that's what I mean. We cannot, I mean, because when you write political poetry, many people easily become really functionalists, and so they don't really care about the new forms. They try to be, they are afraid to complicate things because they think that be very communicative. They should change the world in a way which never really happens. So I think that a poet should not be afraid of looking for new forms, like fresh ideas. So not to repeat the historical ways of writing poetry or tried ways of writing poetry, although they might have been very successful, which might be possible, but I'm more an avant-garde poet, so to speak. So that's what I meant, actually.
Okay, thank you.
I was wondering, as a bilingual poet whose poems are mostly not in English, how involved are you in the translation process, and are there any poems that came out particularly different after translation in terms of meaning?
Yes. Well, all my poems, they are translated in workshops. So I had the chance to work with the translators. And as I can also speak English, I was quite involved, let's say, and I actually allowed the English translations to be slightly different, because for me, poetry translation is not a technical translation, obviously, but the most important thing is that it should really be something beautiful in the target language. It can be slightly different, I don't mind, but it must be beautiful. Otherwise, it's pointless. I mean, why translating my poems? They are not scientific research papers or something like that. But I also have to confess that there might be mistakes in translations, because those poems that you read, they are not properly edited for publication. I mean, they were like translated in workshops, and I use them usually in festivals or events, but they have not been published. So they all needed to be polished a bit, I presume. When I read them, sometimes I say, maybe this is not great, but I think they are above average in terms of translation. And it's also very, very interesting to see how the poems have different effects in different languages. So I also like this difference. So I don't mind that there's a difference at all.
What began your interest in docupoetics or political poetry?
Sorry, can you repeat the beginning of the question, please?
What began your interest in political poetry or docupoetics?
What triggered my interest?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I used to be quite political person. Probably I still am, but I was more involved in demonstrations and more active, so to speak, in political life. And so, and when you live in Turkey, well, it is, well, we can always talk more about Turkey, obviously, but to summarize, it has a lot of problems that everyone should face, and you also see the huge conflicts in the society next to each other, the poverty and the richness, and sometimes well, the problems in the justice system and everything. So it is very, very difficult not to see them as you are, like, if you have a basic intellectual capacity. So I think it is a challenge for like every poet from Turkey to deal with this reality. So the reality calls you in a way. So you see all those things and you want to do something, and you easily become a political person. And once you are politically active, then your poetry starts also to connect with this political reality. And Turkey actually has a very, very strong political history. strong political line, which is mainly socialist realism. And when we go back to the 1920s or 1930s, we can see some really good examples, like really good avant-garde poetry, and also some good maybe in 60s and 70s. But those ways seem to be a bit old-fashioned now. So I wanted to write political poems, but I had to find my own ways to write them, and so that was yeah, how I went to this Docupoetry stuff. There's also this other side of political poems. Of course, I mean, not there can be some political poems which do not contain any kind of documentary material. You can always like talk about yourself, about a political activist, your emotions, your problems. This is also a very popular genre, so to speak, popular line of writing in Turkish and European poetry scene. But I was really curious to find ways to talk about big events, big tragedies, big political, yeah, events, to repeat myself. So that's why I was really looking forward to find ways. And yeah, I think I found a few ways to write them. And so, but to answer your question once again, it was my own political life as an activist that triggered my interest towards this kind of poetry. And well, now I'm still, yeah, I still believe the same things that I believe or not believe. I'm not really, I don't really think this is the right word, but I still think the same values are important, but I'm not as active in the political scene as I was in my early 20s.
Do you have
So,
time for one more, two more?
hmm?
Do you have time for one or two more questions?
Yeah, I have time. It's just 6 o'clock here, so it's late. I actually have nothing better to do, so. Hey.
All right.
So when you write poetry, I would think that you would have a certain point of view to say with your poems. So how do you give the readers an open mind when you're trying to sort of push out a certain perspective with your poetic language? How would you do it?
It's a legitimate question. So I think there should be a balance. Mhm. And that the key concept should be, I think, respect to the opinions of the readers. So I'm happy to be there in the text as myself and to express my own perspective, but it should not dominate the reader. So I feel myself better when I ask questions, not to give ready-made answers. So I think this is the best way. You should. I mean, I try to respect readers' opinion, but I'm happy to deconstruct it if I can. I'm happy if I can make people think that maybe there might be other things that they didn't thought about before. So I think this is the right balance between someone's own perspective and the reader's opinion. So, but yeah, really, I'm always afraid to dominate the reader, to like making harsh propaganda, which is, I mean, not useful at all. You don't really change anything with propaganda. Yeah, that's.
One more question?
I would say, what poem is either the most meaningful to you, or which one do you feel like was the hardest to write, and why?
Well, the hardest poem for me to write. Actually, this is another poem. Probably you did not read it. It is called "The Forgettable Death of Engin Çever." I'm happy to send you afterwards. It's a real story. It's about a guy who has been murdered in prison after with torture and beating. And it was difficult to write, and it also has a interesting story for me because it was a new for me. I read this on the paper and wrote a poem about that guy called Engin Çeber. And actually the poem was about that, okay, we read this, we feel sorry for 1 minute, then we will forget him. So that was the main idea. I wrote this and published it. And well, obviously forget about it like a few weeks later. But then I got a call, and the woman was calling me. She said that she was the sister of Engin Çeber, and she used to live somewhere abroad, and she came to Turkey, to Istanbul, for the trial of his deceased brother. So she wanted to meet me, and yeah, we met, had a coffee together, and she brought me wonderful chocolates from Belgium, and they did that. Yeah. And we ate the chocolates, and well, it was beautiful and terrible at the same time, the taste of the chocolates, because it was such a tragic moment. Me talking to the sister of this young boy and eating chocolates with him, and so yeah, it was very touching, a very touching moment for me. And yeah, I think that's the hardest poem I have ever written. And yeah, I can send you this one.
Thank you.
But I'm also wondering, are you writing poetry yourselves?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Well,
Yes.
Yes.
wow, that's great. It's really great. I hope Andrea will send some examples from what you're writing.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you, Efe, very, very much. Next time, it would be nice to have you here in person.
Of course, but yeah.
Oh, one more question. Is that your personal bookcase?
Sorry.
Behind you, is that your bookcase? Is that your bookshelf with all of your books?
Yeah, this is, yeah, of course.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Wow. That's a library.
I'm
I was
jealous.
like, is he in a library? Or like,
Right,
what?
yeah.
I was like,
Well, it's just a poster just for this sculpture.
Awesome.
just like walk back and look straight at something.
Thank you. Thanks
It's
for
great
calling.
meeting you, Efe.
Yeah, it was great, Andrea. So nice to see you.
Thank you
so much.
So lovely seeing you, and thank you so much for the time. I'll email you probably later tonight or tomorrow.
Okay. We'll talk again soon.
All right. Thank you
Bye.
so much.
All right, thank you. Bye.
Bye. Have a nice day.
Bye.